I never expected her to reach for me, to hold me so tightly in her garden one evening, and whisper, "Don't you dare leave yet." That was the moment everything changed. When I first moved into the small rental house on the corner, I didn't expect to notice her so quickly. The widow next door. Her home wasn't loud or busy, but it carried a kind of presence that was impossible to ignore. The garden in front was always tended with quiet precision, rows of roses, climbing ivy, and a single magnolia tree that leaned slightly toward the street as if listening for secrets. Every morning, I'd see her out there, trimming, watering, or simply standing still with her hands clasped loosely in front of her, as though the flowers were the only things keeping her company. She must have been in her early 40s. There was a grace about her, mature, self-possessed, but I couldn't help noticing the way her eyes held a certain weight, a softness that came not from gentleness alone, but from years of carrying something heavy. I'd pass by with a polite nod, sometimes a half-smile. She'd return it, just barely, as if smiling was a habit she was still learning to practice again. And though I never said much at first, I found myself lingering on the sound of her voice the rare times she spoke, a low, steady tone that could make even the simplest, "good evening," feel like a thread pulling at me. The first time we truly spoke was over something ordinary. She was unloading groceries from the back of her car, a brown paper bag splitting under the weight of too many glass bottles. I caught the moment just as one tilted, and instinctively reached out to steady it. "Careful," I said softly, cradling it in both hands before it could shatter. She blinked, startled, then let out a small laugh. It was the kind of laugh that sounded like it had been asleep for a long time. "Thank you. I should know better than to carry everything in one trip." I offered to help her bring the rest inside. She hesitated, eyes searching my face for a moment, me, the neighbor boy she'd barely met, before finally stepping aside. "If you don't mind," she murmured. Her home smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. Family photos lined the hallway, though most of the frames had only one person in them, her. She noticed me glancing, and without a word, led me straight to the kitchen. We unpacked the bags quietly, the rustle of paper and clinking of glass filling the silence. When I handed her the last jar, our fingers brushed. The contact was small, accidental, but the warmth lingered longer than it should have. "Thank you again," she said, her voice softer now, carrying a note I couldn't quite place. That evening, as I walked back to my place, the air was heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming roses. Yet what stayed with me most wasn't the garden, or the house, or even the photos. It was the way she looked at me in that final moment, half guarded, half grateful, as though I'd been the first person to cross an invisible line she had drawn around herself. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of everything. It was a few evenings later when she invited me to sit with her on the porch. The sun had just dipped low enough that the heat of the day broke into a softer warmth, and the cicadas were beginning their endless chorus. She was already there when I came home, barefoot, legs tucked loosely beneath her on a rocking chair, a thin cardigan draped over her shoulders even though the air was still mild. "Long day?" she asked when I passed by, her voice carrying easily across the short space between our yards. "Not too bad," I answered, setting down my bag. "Yours?" She gave the kind of smile that wasn't meant to convince anyone, only to fill the space between two people. Then, almost hesitantly, she nodded toward the empty chair beside her. "You could sit for a bit, if you'd like." I don't know why her invitation caught me off guard. Maybe it was the softness in her tone, or the way her eyes lingered on mine just a second too long, as though she was asking more than she dared to say out loud. Either way, I found myself walking up the short steps and settling into the chair beside her. On the little table between us sat a teapot and 2 cups, steam curling upward. She poured for me without asking how I took it, and I found that I liked it just as it was, slightly sweet, with a faint floral note. For a while, we spoke about simple things. The neighborhood, the weather, how the magnolia tree out front had been planted when she first moved in. Her laugh came easier this time, and though it was still soft, it seemed to surprise even her. She'd let it escape, then press her lips together quickly, as if to hide it, only for her eyes to betray the lingering spark of joy. I remember watching her in the dimming light, how her hair caught the last threads of gold from the sunset, how her fingers wrapped neatly around the teacup as if she needed the warmth. Every small detail felt deliberate, though I knew it wasn't. It was simply who she was, composed, graceful, yet carrying something delicate just beneath the surface. When the conversation drifted toward music, she asked, "Do you ever listen to records? Not playlists, not digital things, but real records?" I nodded. My parents had a few. The sound was warmer somehow. Imperfect, but human. She smiled at that, a smile that lingered longer than the others. That's exactly it. The porch creaked gently as we rocked in unison. Her bare foot brushed against the railing, tapping lightly in rhythm to some song only she could hear. I found myself leaning back, letting the moment stretch, and realizing how comfortable silence could be with the right person. As the first stars began to show, she tilted her head toward me. "It's been a while since I had someone to share tea with," she said quietly. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of years. I looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, I felt a pull I didn't quite have the courage to name. The rain came without warning. One moment, the sky was only gray with the promise of evening, and the next, heavy drops were drumming against the rooftops, washing the streets in silver. I remember pausing at my window, watching the storm sweep across the neighborhood, when I noticed her lights glowing faintly through the curtains next door. Something pulled me across the wet grass, an instinct I didn't stop to question. By the time I knocked, my shoulders were damp, hair clinging to my forehead. She opened the door slowly, as though she hadn't expected anyone. "Sorry," I said, feeling suddenly foolish. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right." For a moment, she only looked at me. Her cardigan hung loosely from her shoulders, her hair tucked behind one ear. Then, with a small nod, she stepped aside and let me in. The house was quiet except for the soft crackle of a record spinning in the corner, some old jazz tune playing low and lonely. A single lamp lit the living room, casting everything in a warm but subdued glow. She was seated on the couch, and I could see the table set with 2 plates. Both empty, untouched. I hesitated, unsure if I had intruded on something private. She must have noticed, because she gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "I still set the table for 2, she admitted softly, her eyes fixed on the plates. "Out of habit, I suppose." Her words lingered in the air, delicate and unguarded. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't try to fill the silence. Instead, I lowered myself onto the couch beside her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her shoulder. We sat that way for a long moment, just listening to the rain and the record, until the stillness itself began to feel like a kind of conversation. She exhaled slowly, her hands resting in her lap, fingers knotted together. "Some days it feels easier," she whispered. "Other days, like tonight, it feels like everything in this house is waiting for someone who isn't coming back." I turned toward her, but she didn't meet my gaze. Her eyes were distant, focused somewhere just beyond the room. Without thinking, I let my hand drift closer until it brushed against hers. The touch was feather-light, barely there, but I felt the tremor in her fingers, the way her breath caught. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were glistening, not with tears exactly, but with the weight of things she had kept unspoken. "Thank you," she said, her voice a fragile thread. It was only a moment, a brush of hands in the dim light of her living room, but it felt like something more. A quiet surrender, or perhaps the beginning of trust. I didn't press further. I didn't need to. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone isn't words or answers, it's simply not leaving when the silence grows heavy. That night, as I walked back through the rain, the echo of her hand against mine stayed with me. Warm, trembling, alive. And though neither of us had said it out loud, I knew something had shifted. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean. The air was cool, damp with the scent of rain-soaked earth, and the roses in her garden drooped heavy with droplets that glistened in the early light. That weekend, she was already outside when I stepped into my yard, kneeling in the soil with her hair tied loosely, strands falling free against her face. She glanced up when she saw me, her smile quick but brief. "The rain nearly drowned these poor things," she said, brushing dirt from her palms. "I'll have to replant some." "Let me help," I offered, moving toward her before she could argue. She gave me a look, half amusement, half hesitation, but eventually sighed and nodded. "All right. But don't say I didn't warn you. Gardening isn't as effortless as it looks." We worked side by side, the ground soft beneath our knees. My hands grew dirty, clumsy at first, while hers moved with practiced grace, loosening roots, guiding each plant into fresh soil as if she were mending something fragile. There was something strangely calming in the rhythm of it, the quiet rustle of leaves, the soft scrape of trowels against earth. Every now and then, I caught her watching me with a kind of faint wonder, as though surprised I hadn't grown bored and walked away. When our eyes met, she quickly looked down, her lips pressing into a line, as if fighting a thought she didn't dare speak. It was after we finished replanting the last rows that the silence deepened. She stayed kneeling, her hands resting in the dirt, her gaze lowered. I asked gently, "Are you all right?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood slowly, wiping her palms against her jeans, then turned toward me with an expression that seemed to flicker between strength and something much more fragile. And then, without a word, she stepped forward. Her arms slipped around me, sudden and unhesitating. The movement was firm, almost desperate, her cheek pressing against my chest. I froze for a moment, caught off guard, before instinct made me return the embrace, carefully at first, then with more certainty. I could feel her breath against me, uneven, warm through the thin fabric of my shirt. The faint scent of earth and lilacs clung to her skin, mingling with the damp freshness of the garden. Her grip was strong, as though afraid that if she let go, I might vanish with the morning. Her voice came muffled, fragile against me, "Don't you dare leave yet." The words struck something deep, something raw. They weren't just about the garden. They weren't even about that moment alone. They carried the weight of years of silence, of absence, of nights she had endured with no one there to hold on to. I held her closer, feeling the tension in her shoulders slowly ease beneath my hands. For a long while, neither of us moved. The roses swayed gently around us, the air still heavy with rain, and in that quiet space, I understood more than she had spoken. This wasn't a casual embrace. It was a breaking open, a moment when loneliness finally reached out, and I had been there to catch it. When she finally pulled back, her eyes shone with a quiet vulnerability she didn't try to hide. And though no promises were spoken, I knew I wasn't going anywhere. After that morning in the garden, nothing between us felt quite the same. Her words, "Don't you dare leave yet," echoed in me long after her arms had let go. I carried them through the day like a secret, one that both comforted me and unsettled me at the same time. Because now, there was no denying it. I wanted to be near her. Not just as a helpful neighbor, not just as a quiet presence when her nights grew heavy, but for reasons I couldn't name without my voice faltering. And that realization came with its own storm. I began to notice the looks. The woman across the street, always tending her mailbox a little too long when she saw me step onto the widow's porch. The older couple down the block, their conversations pausing the moment I passed by. Nobody said anything outright, but the glances carried weight, whispers I could almost hear. And if they noticed, then she must have too. For a time, she pulled back ever so slightly. Not enough to close the door, but enough to remind me of the boundaries she kept. Some evenings, when I'd see her light on, I'd hover on my own porch, debating whether to knock. Sometimes I did, and she'd greet me with her usual gentle smile, though I could sense the hesitation in her eyes. Other nights, I didn't, and the distance settled heavy in my chest. It wasn't just the neighbors. It was the question that gnawed at me whenever I thought of her too long: was this fair? To her, to me, to the memory of what she had lost. She was a woman who had built her life, carried grief, learned how to keep going when everything inside her must have begged her not to. I was younger, restless, still learning how to find my place in the world. What right did I have to step into hers? Yet, despite the doubts, the pull between us only grew stronger. One evening, we found ourselves sitting again on her porch, just as we had before. The night air was cool, crickets singing in the distance. She wore a soft sweater, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. The quiet stretched, not uncomfortable, but charged. Our hands rested close on the armrest between us. Inch by inch, without thinking, mine drifted toward hers. This time, when our fingers touched, she didn't move away. Instead, she let the contact linger, her thumb brushing lightly against mine in a gesture so subtle, so tender, it nearly unraveled me. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence said everything, that she felt the weight of the world pressing against her, that she feared what people would think, but that, in this moment, she chose to stay connected anyway. I sat there, her hand barely against mine, and realized the conflict wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about courage. Whether we could find enough of it to stop caring about the glances, the whispers, the age between us. That night, I didn't find the answer. But I knew this, I couldn't walk away. The distance between us couldn't last forever. After the garden, after the nights on her porch, it was impossible to pretend we hadn't crossed into something deeper. Yet in the days that followed, she grew quieter again, almost retreating into herself. Her smiles were briefer, her words shorter. At first, I told myself to give her space. But as each day passed, I felt it more, an ache in my chest, the sharp sense that I was losing her before anything had even begun. So one evening, unable to bear it any longer, I walked next door. The air was cool, heavy with the faint sweetness of honeysuckle, and my hands shook as I knocked. She opened the door slowly, surprise flickering across her face. For a moment, she looked as though she might tell me she was busy, that tonight wasn't good. But then she sighed, stepped aside, and let me in. The house was dim, lit only by the amber glow of a single lamp. She sat down on the edge of the sofa, folding her hands neatly in her lap. I stayed standing for a moment, unsure if she wanted me there, until she finally spoke. "You shouldn't be here so much," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. "People will start to talk." I swallowed hard. Let them talk. Her head lifted, her gaze sharp now, almost wounded. "You don't understand. I've lived with whispers before. They stay, even after people forget why they started. I can't," her voice cracked, and she pressed her lips together. "I can't live through that again." I stepped closer, heart pounding. "I'm not here out of pity. I don't stay because I feel sorry for you. I stay because," my voice faltered, but I forced the words out. "Because I feel alive when I'm near you. And when I'm not, it feels like something's missing." Her eyes shone, tears threatening to fall. "Do you know how dangerous it is for me to believe you mean that? Do you know how much it would hurt if I let myself?" She trailed off, unable to finish. Without thinking, I lowered myself to the sofa, close enough that my knee brushed hers. Gently, I lifted a hand, brushing back a strand of hair that had fallen across her face. My fingers lingered, trembling slightly, against her temple. She closed her eyes at the touch, a single tear slipping free. I leaned closer, so near our foreheads almost touched. I didn't kiss her, didn't dare, because it wasn't about taking. It was about waiting, about showing her that I wasn't leaving. That I wasn't afraid of her pain, or the whispers, or the years between us. Her breath shuddered, caught somewhere between fear and longing. And though her lips never touched mine, the electricity of that closeness was enough to unravel us both. In that moment, everything was said without a single word. The night after our almost confession, something inside me shifted. I thought maybe she would retreat again, that she'd let fear and silence put walls back between us. But when I saw her the next evening, standing at her window with the curtain half drawn, our eyes met across the dim light, and she didn't look away. She held my gaze, steady, as though daring herself not to hide anymore. Moments later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, she was there, wrapped in a soft sweater, her arms folded as if she were holding herself together. For a moment, she looked younger, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. "Do you want to come over?" she asked, her voice quiet, uncertain. I nodded without hesitation. Her living room felt different that night. The lamps cast a golden glow, the record player hummed gently in the corner, and there was no set table waiting for someone who would never come home. Instead, there was only her, and me. She gestured for me to sit beside her on the couch. The moment I did, she leaned in, resting her head lightly against my shoulder. The gesture was simple, but it carried all the weight of the walls she had been holding up for years. I could feel the warmth of her cheek, the steady rhythm of her breathing as it began to slow, and the soft way her hand drifted toward mine until our fingers laced together. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence was no longer heavy, it was full, alive, peaceful. I let myself sink into it, into the realization that I didn't need grand declarations or stolen kisses. I only needed this, her choosing to let me stay. When she finally did speak, her voice was almost a whisper. "It's been so long since I let anyone this close." I turned slightly, enough that I could look at her profile, the lamplight softening the lines of her face. "I don't want to replace what you had," I said carefully. "I just want to be here. With you. In whatever way you'll let me." Her eyes closed, her shoulders relaxing against me. "You don't know how much I needed to hear that," she murmured. So we sat there, watching the night stretch on through the window. The sky was clear after days of rain, stars scattered above us, the garden outside still glistening faintly in the moonlight. She shifted closer, her arms sliding gently around me now, not with desperation, like in the garden, but with quiet certainty. And I held her, letting the moment wrap around us like a promise. It wasn't about filling a silence anymore. It wasn't about pity or loneliness or fear. It was about choosing each other, two lives, different but somehow meeting in the same place, at the same time. As the record spun softly in the background, I realized this was what it meant to begin again. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who might need a little warmth tonight, and subscribe for more slow burn love stories. Your support helps these quiet moments come alive.